CEOs laughed at the cleaner at quiet luxury. My vice president revenge exposed abuse, rebuilt HR. My boss humiliated me during a luxury retreat. She's used to scrubbing floors. Let her clean the pool area. He tossed me a mop in front of everyone. They laughed. He didn't know the guest list had just changed. I vanished that night and returned in a helicopter. Silence fell. The silver Mercedes pulled away from the circular driveway, leaving me standing alone with my battered duffel bag and the weight of a promise I'd made to a woman who could no longer hold me accountable. My scuffed white sneakers, the same ones I'd worn through college, through late-night study sessions in the library and early morning runs to clear my head, felt foreign against the polished marble steps of Serenity Haven. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to become invisible in the very place my mother had built from her dreams, a sanctuary born from her own battles with illness and loss. The air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass, the kind of scent that promised peace but delivered something far more complicated for those who worked behind the scenes. The receptionist's manicured nails clicked against her keyboard without pause when I approached, a rhythmic sound that felt almost mechanical, like the ticking of a clock counting down to my first shift. Her nameplate read Brittany in gold letters, gleaming under the soft lobby lights, and her expression suggested I was interrupting something far more important than my arrival, perhaps an email, a social media scroll, or simply the quiet rhythm of her day. "You the new girl?" she asked, eyes still glued to her screen, not even glancing up to acknowledge the human standing before her. "Clock in, grab a uniform, don't be late, locker room's down the hall, third door on your right, orientation starts in 20 minutes. I nodded, absorbing every detail, the way she didn't offer her name, how her voice carried the practiced indifference of someone who'd delivered this speech countless times to countless faceless new hires, the subtle way she positioned her body to create distance, leaning slightly away as if proximity might contaminate her space. I wasn't a person to her. I was just another replaceable pair of hands, another cog in the machine that kept Serenity Haven running smoothly for the guests who paid top dollar to escape their realities. "Thank you," I said softly, shouldering my bag, the strap digging into my collarbone from the weight of my few belongings. She didn't acknowledge the gratitude, didn't even flicker an eyelash. Her fingers resumed their dance across the keys, dismissing me without a word. Before we continue, if you believe everyone deserves workplace dignity, regardless of their role, please subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now, let's see how this unfolds. The employee corridor felt like stepping into a different world, a stark contrast that hit me like a physical force. Gone were the warm earth tones, the plush carpets, and the soft, ambient lighting of the guest areas that whispered luxury and relaxation. Here, fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead with a harsh, unrelenting glow, casting sharp shadows on beige walls that seemed to absorb any hint of warmth. The air was cooler, laced with the faint scent of industrial cleaners and stale coffee. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, worn in places from years of hurried passages, each step taking me further from the life I'd known, the boardrooms and business classes, and deeper into the reality my mother had wanted me to understand, a world where labor was invisible and dignity often sacrificed. From day one, I became a student of human behavior, observing not just actions but the subtle undercurrents that revealed true character. During my first kitchen shift, assigned to prep work under the watchful eye of the head chef, I watched Marcus tear into a teenage prep cook who diced onions slightly too large. The boy couldn't have been more than 17, his face still carrying the softness of youth, his uniform hanging loosely on his slender frame. "We're not feeding pigs here," Marcus screamed, his face flushed red, veins bulging at his temples as he slammed a knife down on the stainless steel counter. "Do it again, and this time, use your brain, if you even have one." The kid's hands shook as he started over, his knife slipping slightly on the cutting board, tears welling in his eyes but never falling. He was too proud or too scared to let them. I saw something die behind his eyes that day, that spark of eagerness every new employee brings on their first day, the wide-eyed hope that this job might be a stepping stone, a place to learn and grow. It was extinguished in a blaze of verbal fire, replaced by a hollow resignation that settled over him like a shroud. But it was Scott Morrison, the operations head, who truly commanded attention and instilled a quiet fear in the staff. He moved through the halls like royalty inspecting his kingdom, his stride confident and unhurried, his pressed khakis and polo shirt marking him as management, even without his badge, which he wore prominently like a medal of authority. His presence alone could silence a room, conversations tapering off as he passed, eyes averting to avoid drawing his gaze. "Remember, people," he'd announced during one of the mandatory staff meetings held in the cramped conference room that smelled of old coffee and desperation, "you're all dispensable. There's a line of applicants waiting to take your place, longer than you can imagine." He'd pause then, letting the threat settle like dust on every surface, infiltrating every thought. Excellence isn't optional here, it's survival. Slack off and you're out. No second chances. The maintenance staff occupied an even lower rung on this invisible ladder, often overlooked entirely. Jordan Martinez worked quietly, efficiently, his tool belt jangling softly with each step as he moved through the shadows of early morning setups and late evening breakdowns. Most people looked right through him, as if he were part of the furniture, an extension of the plumbing or the wiring, rather than a human being with skills and stories. But I noticed the small things, how he held doors for the elderly housekeepers who struggled with their carts, how he always had a spare light bulb tucked in his pocket or a working pen when someone needed one to sign off on a task. There was kindness in his silence, a quiet dignity in his invisibility that spoke volumes about his character. On my third day, while changing out of my uniform in the locker room, a space that smelled of bleach and sweat, with benches scarred from years of use, I heard soft crying from one of the restroom stalls adjacent. The sound was muffled, desperate, someone trying hard not to be heard, biting back sobs that echoed faintly off the tiled walls. I recognized the voice immediately, Emma, barely 19, with eager eyes that lit up when she talked about her little brother back home and hands that worked twice as fast as anyone else's, as if speed could earn her approval or security. She'd been assigned to the guest suites, the most scrutinized position in housekeeping, where every folded towel and fluffed pillow was inspected under a microscope. I didn't knock, didn't ask questions that might embarrass her further. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the granola bar I'd saved from lunch, a simple oat and honey bar, nothing fancy but a small comfort. I slid it under the stall door and waited, leaning against the sink, my heart aching for her pain. The crying stopped abruptly. A trembling hand reached down and took the offering, fingers brushing the floor briefly. "Thank you," came a whispered voice, fragile but grateful. I squeezed her shoulder gently through the door, feeling the tension in her muscles, and left without a word. Sometimes kindness speaks louder than conversation, bridging gaps that words might widen. The break room became my observatory, a 20-minute window of unpaid time where masks slipped and real personalities emerged amid the hum of vending machines and the clatter of plastic trays. Most tables buzzed with gossip or complaints, whispers about favoritism, gripes about schedules, the occasional burst of laughter over a shared misfortune, but one sat perpetually empty except for a single occupant. Gloria Santos had worked at Serenity Haven for 8 years, her silver hair always pulled into a neat bun despite the physical demands of her job scrubbing floors and changing linens. She ate alone, read paperback novels with worn covers that promised escape in their faded titles, and minded her own business with the wisdom of someone who'd learned when to speak and when to listen, her eyes sharp behind reading glasses that perched on the end of her nose. One particularly exhausting afternoon, after scrubbing guest bathroom tiles until my knees ached from the hard floor and my back screamed in protest, the grout lines blurring from sweat in my eyes, I collapsed into the chair across from her. My hands were raw, fingernails chipped despite the gloves, and I felt every one of my 28 years in that moment. She looked up from her apple slices, neatly arranged on a napkin, and her romance novel, studied my face for a long moment with eyes that had seen too much, then patted the seat beside her gently. "I don't talk much either," she said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place, perhaps from a childhood in a different country, a life before this one. "But that doesn't mean we can't share the quiet. Sometimes silence is the best company." From that day forward, we became companions in silence, a ritual that anchored my days. She'd offer half her apple, crisp and sweet, sliced with a plastic knife. I'd share my crackers, plain but filling. No life stories exchanged, no complaints about management that could get us in trouble, no gossip about co-workers who might overhear. Just two women finding peace in each other's presence during the brief respite between shifts, the clock on the wall ticking away our stolen moments. My notebook became my constant companion, a small black journal with a worn leather cover that fit perfectly in my apron pocket. In it, I recorded observations that might seem meaningless to others, but painted a complete picture for me: staff schedules with their patterns of favoritism, management habits like Scott's preference for morning inspections, guest complaint patterns that revealed entitled behaviors, maintenance issues that went unreported because no one listened to the fixers. During my lunch breaks, often eaten quickly at a corner table, I'd sketched the layout of different floors in meticulous detail, noting blind spots in security coverage where cameras didn't reach, areas like the service elevators where employees felt safe to speak freely without fear of being overheard. It was during one of these sketching sessions that Jordan found me. I'd chosen a quiet corner near the loading dock, the air heavy with the smell of deliveries and diesel, my pen moving quickly across the page as I mapped out the service corridors with arrows and notes. "Planning an escape?" he asked, his tone light but curious, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. There was no judgment in his voice, just genuine interest, the kind that came from someone who understood the desire for hidden paths. I looked up at him, really looked for the first time beyond his role. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that were slightly smudged from work, calloused hands that spoke of honest labor fixing what others broke, and a quiet presence that didn't demand attention but earned it. "More like understanding the layout," I replied truthfully, capping my pen. "I learn better when I can see how everything connects, how the pieces fit together." He nodded, as if this made perfect sense, leaning against a crate with ease. "This place has more hidden passages than most people realize, built that way on purpose, back in the day." He paused, glancing around to ensure privacy, then added quietly, "The woman who designed it understood that sometimes people need escape routes, not just from guests, but from the pressure, from the grind." My pen stopped moving mid-stroke. "The original owner?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden rush of emotion. "Yeah. Elena Hartley. She died a few years back, cancer, I think, but everyone who worked for her still talks about how different things were then." His voice carried genuine respect, a rare warmth in this environment. She knew everyone's name, asked about their families, remembered birthdays, made this place feel like, well, like family, not this corporate machine it is now. I resumed sketching, but my hand trembled slightly, the lines less precise. "What happened to her family?" I probed gently, keeping my tone casual. "Has a daughter somewhere, I think, but she never comes around. Probably too busy with her fancy life in the city, boardrooms and all that, to care about this place." He shrugged, a hint of disappointment in the gesture. "Can't say I blame her. Money changes people, makes them forget where they came from." If only he knew how wrong he was about that daughter, how deeply she cared, how she was right there sketching maps to reclaim what was lost. But my silence had become my greatest asset, a shield that allowed me to observe without interference, and I wasn't about to abandon it now. Instead, I simply smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, and returned to my drawing, adding one more note to the growing collection of truths I was gathering about my mother's legacy and the people who were either destroying it with their toxicity or desperately trying to preserve what remained of her vision through small acts of decency. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, my phone buzzing in my pocket during a quick break, marked with red exclamation points and Scott's signature aggressive tone that leaped off the screen. "Vetch Industries full facility booking. Zero tolerance for mistakes. Smile wider, speak less, be invisible." The tech company's logo gleamed from the header, a sleek, modern design with sharp lines that promised innovation and disruption in the market. What they disrupted, I would soon discover in painful detail, was any remaining shred of dignity I thought I could maintain while undercover. The preparation was military-grade intense, a whirlwind that consumed every waking hour, extra housekeeping shifts that left us exhausted, kitchen staff working double time with no overtime pay, groundskeepers trimming every blade of grass to perfection under the watchful eyes of supervisors. Scott prowled the corridors like a general before battle, his clipboard clutched tight like a weapon, barking orders with unprecedented fervor that echoed off the walls. "These people pay more in a weekend than most of you make in 6 months, he announced during the emergency staff meeting, his voice booming in the room packed with tired faces. "Act accordingly. No excuses, no mistakes. Impress them or you're gone." I drew the short straw in the assignment lottery, pool and patio duty under the merciless July sun that turned the outdoor areas into a furnace. while other staff retreated to air-conditioned interiors between tasks, finding brief reprieves in cool hallways. I spent my days scrubbing pool tiles with brushes that blistered my hands, arranging lounge chairs in precise geometric patterns that satisfied some aesthetic ideal, and polishing glass surfaces that reflected the blazing heat back into my face like mirrors of fire. My uniform, already faded from countless washes in industrial machines, grew darker with sweat stains that no amount of laundering could eliminate, clinging to my skin uncomfortably. The Vitek executives arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, tires crunching on the gravel with authority, their designer luggage handled by bellhops who struggled under the weight while maintaining smiles. The guests swept into the lobby wearing expensive casual wear, the kind of calculated informality with designer logos subtly placed, outfits that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I watched from behind the pool house, a structure painted in serene blues but offering little shade, noting how they moved with the confidence of people who'd never questioned their right to occupy space, to demand service, to treat the world as their playground. By the second day, the heat had become unbearable, an oppressive blanket that made every movement laborious. The pool deck radiated warmth even through my rubber-soled shoes, the concrete hot enough to feel through the soles, and the metal handles of my cleaning equipment burned my palms, leaving red marks that stung with sweat. I found myself taking frequent breaks in the scant shade of palm trees, pressing cold water bottles against my wrists to cool my overheated blood, veins pulsing visibly under my skin. None of the guests seemed to notice the temperature or the effort it took to maintain their paradise. They lounged comfortably under market umbrellas with wide brims, their drinks perpetually refreshed by attentive servers who darted like shadows. The wine mixer was scheduled for Friday evening, the crown jewel of their retreat package, an event billed as networking with elegance. String lights twinkled overhead as dusk fell, casting romantic shadows across the patio where I'd spent the week scrubbing every inch until it gleamed. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner, their notes floating on the warm air while servers circulated with champagne flutes bubbling with golden liquid and artisanal canapes on silver trays, tiny bites of luxury that represented hours of kitchen labor. I was assigned to maintain the perimeter, a role that kept me moving constantly, emptying ashtrays before they overflowed, collecting abandoned glasses with the ghostly efficiency of good help that was seen but not noticed. Scott appeared at my elbow as I bent to retrieve a discarded napkin, the paper sticky with spilled drink. His cologne was overpowering in the evening heat, a cloying sweetness of expensive notes that made my stomach turn, mixing badly with the scent of chlorine and flowers. "Make sure you stay busy," he hissed, his voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear but sharp enough to cut. "These people don't want to see you standing around looking idle. You're here to serve, not to breathe." I nodded, continuing my circuit without a word. My jaw tight, the conversations around me buzzed with industry jargon and corporate gossip, acquisitions discussed like chess moves, market disruptions planned with glee, personnel changes talked about with the casual cruelty of people who viewed human resources as exactly that, resources to be optimized, upgraded, or discarded without a second thought. One executive laughed loudly about cleaning house in his engineering department, firing a team that had underperformed, the metaphor hitting closer to home than he could have imagined, a painful echo of the mop that would soon follow. The moment arrived without warning, a pivot point that would change everything. I was refilling the champagne bucket with ice from a nearby station, the cubes clinking musically, when Scott's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade, loud and deliberate. "Perfect timing," he announced, his tone jovial for the audience but carrying an edge that made several conversations pause, heads turning. "She's used to mops. Let her clean the pool drain, too. Show's on." The mop appeared in my peripheral vision before I could process what was happening. Hurled with force. Scott's throw was deliberate, theatrical, a performance designed for maximum humiliation in front of his peers. The wooden handle struck the edge of the champagne bucket with a metallic clang that rang out, sending ice cubes scattering across the patio stones like hail. Champagne splashed onto my apron in a cold shock, the bubbles catching the string lights like liquid diamonds, sparkling mockingly. The silence that followed felt infinite, a void that swallowed all sound. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, the distant jazz quartet faltering for a note, the gentle lap of pool water against tiles that I'd scrubbed that morning. Then came the laughter, Not the warm, inclusive laughter of shared joy between friends, but something sharp and predatory, edged with cruelty. It started with one person, a snort that grew into a guffaw, then rippled outward like a toxic wave crashing over the group. Phones appeared in hands almost instinctively, cameras pointed in my direction as if I were part of the evening's entertainment, a live show to capture and share. My body moved on autopilot, years of training kicking in to maintain composure. I bent down slowly, retrieved the mop with hands that trembled slightly and straightened with deliberate calm. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a rage so pure it threatened to consume me from the inside, a fire that burned hot in my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed to unleash years of business school training, to reveal exactly who they were laughing at, Stephanie Hartley, heir to this empire, to watch their faces crumble as they realized their mistake, the power shift. Instead, I turned and walked away. Each step felt like lifting concrete blocks anchored to my feet, but I kept my spine straight, my chin level, my expression neutral. The laughter followed me across the patio, through the pool gate with its creak of hinges, past the carefully manicured gardens my mother had designed with love, rose bushes in full bloom, paths winding like invitations to peace. It echoed in my ears even after I'd reached the safety of the service corridor, the door closing behind me with a thud that muffled but didn't erase the sound. From the kitchen window, steamed from boiling pots, I caught sight of Gloria. She stood at the industrial sink, her hands motionless in the soapy water up to her elbows, watching the scene unfold with an expression I'd never seen before on her gentle face. Her features had hardened into something resembling granite, lips pressed thin, and her eyes held a fury that made my own anger seem pale by comparison, a mother's protective rage. She saw me looking through the glass and gave the slightest nod, not sympathy that might pity, but recognition of shared pain. She understood exactly what had just happened, the degradation, the line crossed. But one woman in that crowd hadn't laughed, hadn't even smiled. Nina Foster sat at a corner table under the lights, her wine glass untouched, condensation pooling at the base, her face a mask of professional composure that barely concealed her disgust, eyebrows furrowed slightly. I'd noticed her earlier in the week. She asked servers their names with genuine interest, said please and thank you without condescension, and left her own towels folded neatly when she left the pool area, a small act of consideration, an anomaly in a group that treated service staff like decorative objects, background to their foreground. Later, as I methodically wiped down lounge chairs in the fading light, the sun dipping low and painting the sky in oranges, she approached. Her footsteps were measured, deliberate on the stone, giving me time to compose myself, to wipe my face if needed. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice carrying genuine respect, low to avoid drawing attention. When I looked up, eyes still stinging, she pressed a business card into my palm with practiced discretion, fingers brief but firm. "If you ever need a witness, or a lawyer," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine with unmistakable sincerity, dark and steady, "call me, day or night." The card was elegant, heavy stock, expensive, Nina Foster, employment law, with a prestigious firm's letterhead in embossed gold, contact details crisp. I slipped it into my apron pocket without a word, the card a small weight against my thigh. But she saw the gratitude in my eyes, a nod of thanks before turning away gracefully. That night, I folded towels for the last time in the laundry room that had become my second home, the hum of dryers a constant backdrop, the air thick with fabric softener. My hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, fold, stack, repeat, while my mind processed the evening's events in loops, the laughter replaying. I pulled out a piece of hotel stationery from a stack, the paper crisp with the Serenity Haven logo, and wrote carefully in my neat script, "Gloria, thank you for seeing me when others looked through me. Your kindness meant everything." I added a period with finality. I changed out of my uniform slowly, savoring the symbolic weight of removing each piece, peeling away the identity I'd worn. The name tag went into the trash with a clink. The apron followed, heavy with the day's spills. I pulled on my own clothes, faded jeans that fit like old friends and a simple t-shirt that felt like armor after days in that polyester prison, restrictive and impersonal. The rear service gate creaked as I pushed it open with my shoulder, stepping into the warm night air laced with cricket songs. Behind me, the retreat glowed with golden light from windows, laughter still drifting from the patio where my humiliation had become their entertainment, a story they'd tell later. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Some exits don't require explanations. They speak for themselves in their silence. The black SUV's headlights cut through the darkness as I approached the main road, my footsteps echoing against the asphalt still warm from the day. Davis stepped out of the driver's seat with quiet efficiency, a man in his 60s with silver hair neatly combed and the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of discretion, serving without intrusion. He didn't ask questions about why I was leaving at this hour, didn't comment on my disheveled appearance with sweat-dried hair or the fact that I was leaving through the service entrance at nearly midnight like a thief in the night. "Mr. Lincoln's expecting you," he said simply, opening the rear door with practiced efficiency, the interior light casting a soft glow. The leather seats felt foreign after weeks of plastic break-room chairs that stuck to skin and metal lockers cold to the touch. As we pulled away from Serenity Haven, gravel crunching under tires, I watched the golden lights shrink in the side mirror until they disappeared entirely behind a curtain of oak trees lining the drive, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The 40-minute drive passed in complete silence. No radio playing soft jazz, no small talk to fill the void, just the steady hum of tires against pavement and my own thoughts turning like storm clouds, dark and churning. Davis understood the weight of moments like these, transitions that required space to breathe, to process the hurt, to prepare for what came next without interruption. His eyes met mine once in the rearview mirror, a brief acknowledgement in the dim light that conveyed more understanding than words ever could. A silent, "I've got you." The Lincoln estate sat nestled in rolling hills, its Victorian architecture softened by climbing ivy that wrapped the walls like a hug and wraparound porches that spoke of Sunday afternoons rocking in chairs and sweet tea in glasses sweating in the heat. Warm light spilled from the windows like invitations, and I could see Dad's silhouette pacing in his study, a habit he'd maintained since I was a child, walking the perimeter of his thoughts, hands clasped behind his back, until they settled into clarity like puzzle pieces. He met me at the front door before I could knock, the wood heavy under my knuckles, a steaming mug of coffee already in his hands, steam curling in the porch light. Richard Lincoln had been my mother's attorney, business partner, and closest friend for over 20 years, their bond forged in late-night planning sessions and shared dreams. When she died, he'd become something more, the keeper of her secrets buried in legal documents, the executor of her impossible dreams outlined in her will, and my reluctant guardian through this year-long odyssey of discovery that tested every limit. "You could have left after month 2, he said, handing me the coffee, the mug warm against my cold hands. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched me endure far more than any daughter should have to bear in the name of honoring her mother's wishes, his eyes tired with worry. The Tennessee kitchen incident was enough to prove the point, that place with the burns and the screaming chef. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep through my palms, grounding me. "Mom would have stayed the year," I replied, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk, the one with the slight dip from years of use. She would have seen it through to the end, no matter how difficult it became, how much it hurt. "Dad," I'd called him that since I was 12, after he stepped in without hesitation, leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking, and studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd negotiated million-dollar deals by reading subtle expressions, micro-movements in brows and lips. "Tell me about tonight," he said quietly. "No judgment, just invitation." I recounted the evening's events with clinical precision, starting from the setup, the heat, the throw, the splash, the laughter, watching his jaw tighten with each detail, muscles clenching. When I reached the part about the mop hitting the champagne bucket, ice flying, his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup, porcelain straining. By the time I finished, voice steady but eyes burning, the grandfather clock in the corner had chimed twice, its deep tones marking the passage of time we could never reclaim, hours lost to pain. "Elena built Serenity Haven as a sanctuary," he said finally, his voice thick with memory, eyes distant. "After her cancer diagnosis, after months of treatments that stripped away everything, hair, strength, hope, except her determination to survive and give back, she wanted to create something beautiful. Something healing for others facing the same." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at gardens that mirrored the ones my mother had designed at the retreat. Flower beds in bloom, paths lit softly. It wasn't always about corporate packages and executive bonuses that lined pockets. She envisioned a place where people could find peace regardless of their bank account, where healing was accessible. The original vision lived in photo albums he pulled from his filing cabinet with care, dust motes dancing in the light, images of families recovering from tragedy in support circles, support groups for cancer survivors sharing stories on lawns, art therapy sessions for children with disabilities painting under trees. My mother had poured her heart into every detail, from the meditation gardens with benches for contemplation to the wheelchair-accessible paths that wound through native wildflower meadows bursting with color. Her will was unconventional, Dad continued, returning to his desk with a leather portfolio I'd seen countless times over the past year, its edges worn. She could have simply left you the controlling stake in the company, signed and done. Instead, she insisted you earn it by walking in the shoes of every person who would ever work for you, feeling the weight. He opened the portfolio, revealing pages of handwritten notes in my mother's careful script, loops and lines familiar. 1 year, every entry-level position, no exceptions, no shortcuts. I traced my finger along her words, feeling the indent of her pen against the paper, a connection across time. She wanted me to understand the weight of leadership, I whispered, voice catching. She wanted you to understand the weight of humanity, he corrected gently. Elena knew that power without empathy becomes tyranny, cold and destructive. She'd seen too many executives who viewed their employees as disposable assets rather than human beings with families to feed, dreams to chase, and dignity to protect. The journey had taken me across 4 states and through 11 grueling months, each position a lesson etched in fatigue. Industrial kitchens in Atlanta, where I'd learned that burns from hot ovens and cuts from knives were considered occupational hazards rather than safety failures to address. Laundry facilities in Nashville where the heat reached dangerous levels in rooms without proper ventilation, and nobody complained because they needed the work to pay rent. Guest services in Asheville where I'd been screamed at by entitled customers who viewed service staff as emotional punching bags for their frustrations. Each position had taught me something different about the machinery of hospitality, how quickly turnover occurred when managers ruled through fear and threats, how small kindnesses like a shared snack could transform someone's entire day from despair to hope, how dignity wasn't a luxury for the privileged but a fundamental human right that too many employers forgot to provide in their pursuit of profit. Scott Morrison was the final test, I said, pulling out my notebook, pages filled with ink, and sliding it across the desk with a thud. Everything I observed, every conversation I overheard in break rooms, every pattern of abuse I witnessed in meetings. It's all documented, dates, times, quotes. Dad flipped through the pages slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each entry, staff turnover rates that approached 90% annually as people burned out, complaints that were filed through proper channels and mysteriously disappeared from records, a toxic culture that had transformed my mother's sanctuary into exactly the kind of workplace she'd spent her life trying to reform, hierarchical and soul-crushing. "We've seen enough," he said finally, closing the notebook with a decisive snap that echoed. His phone buzzed against the desk wood, a text message that made him smile for the first time all evening, lines easing around his eyes. "Your corporate identity has been activated, Stephanie Hartley, Vice President of Operations and Employee Relations. Your business cards arrived this afternoon, printed and ready." I pulled out Nena Foster's card from my pocket, the elegant lettering catching the lamplight warmly. "I'm ready," I typed into my phone with steady fingers, sending the message that would set everything in motion, a domino falling. The response came within minutes, prompt, "I'll be there Monday morning. Time to make this right. Count on me." My next call went to Human Resources at our corporate headquarters, the line connecting after hours. The night manager, accustomed to emergency situations in the hospitality world, answered on the second ring with a professional tone. "This is Stephanie Hartley. I need complete internal complaint records for Serenity Haven dating back 3 years. Also, staff turnover reports, exit interview transcripts if they exist, and any documentation related to Scott Morrison's management practices, emails, notes, everything." My voice surprised me, calm, clear, carrying the authority I'd inherited through blood and now claimed through experience. "How quickly can you compile that information without alerting local management?" "We can have everything ready by Monday morning, Miss Hartley, digitized and secure. Is there anything else you need to proceed?" "Yes," I said, glancing at Dad, who nodded encouragingly with pride. Schedule a full facility audit for Tuesday, independent team, and arrange for temporary management coverage from outside. We may need to make some immediate personnel changes, effective soon. After hanging up the click final, I sat in the familiar silence of Dad's study, surrounded by law books in shelves to the ceiling and family photos that included images of my mother from happier times, smiling at openings, arms around staff. The woman in those pictures radiated the same quiet strength I'd been trying to channel all year, the same determination to create positive change in a world that often rewarded cruelty over compassion, profit over people. "She'd be proud of you," Dad said softly, following my gaze to a photo of Mom cutting the ribbon at Serenity Haven's grand opening, scissors gleaming. "Not because you're about to seek justice, though that matters greatly. She'd be proud because you chose to learn rather than judge from afar, to understand the struggles rather than condemn the strugglers." The truth behind the name Hartley carried more weight than I'd ever fully comprehended before this year. It wasn't just about ownership or inheritance passed down. It was about responsibility to those who built it, legacy to honor, and the courage to transform pain into purpose that helped others. Tomorrow would bring confrontation in bright lights, difficult conversations with hard truths, and the kind of leadership decisions that would define, not just my career, but the kind of person I chose to become, empathetic or authoritarian. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem possible. Air fresh after overnight rain. I chose my outfit with deliberate care in front of the mirror. Charcoal slyett slacks that spoke of authority without arrogance. Tailored fit, a navy blazer that commanded respect with its structure, and the pearl earrings my mother had worn to every important business meeting, cool against my skin. The badge felt substantial in my palm, laminated, Stephanie Hartley, field auditor, corporate operations, no more polyester uniforms scratching skin, no more anonymity in crowds. The front doors of Serenity Haven opened with a soft whoosh of air conditioning blasting cool, and I stepped into the marble lobby where Brittany still sat behind her pristine reception desk, phone in hand. Her manicured fingers paused over her keyboard as I approached with purpose, her expression shifting from practiced indifference to curiosity, then surprise. She didn't recognize me at first. 3 weeks had transformed more than just my clothing. It had hardened resolve. "Good morning," I said, presenting my badge with the same professional courtesy I'd once craved from her, voice even. "Stephanie Hartley, corporate operations. I'll need access to the staff briefing room in 15 minutes. Full assembly." Her eyes widened as she processed the name. Hartley, like the plaques on walls, like the company letterhead on every form. "Of course, Miss Hartley. Should I notify Mr. Morrison immediately?" "That won't be necessary," I replied, watching recognition dawn across her features like sunrise. "He'll be informed shortly, in the meeting." The employee corridor felt different now, charged with anticipation rather than resignation, whispers following me. Word traveled fast in places like this, gossip the currency. By the time I reached the briefing room, fluorescent lit, conversations had shifted to hushed whispers and questioning glances at my blazer. The lights that had once felt harsh now illuminated a space about to undergo transformation, renewal. Sandra Williams from corporate HR had arrived 30 minutes earlier, driving through the night, her briefcase packed with documentation that would reshape everything. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades cleaning up other people's messes in boardrooms. She reviewed her files one final time, glasses perched, as staff members filtered into the room, chairs scraping. I watched familiar faces claim their usual seats with new energy. Jordan near the back, his tool belt traded for clean khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look younger, more hopeful, hands folded. Emma, the young cleaner who'd cried in the bathroom stall, choosing a middle-row seat, her posture straighter than I'd ever seen it, chin up, and there was Gloria, settling into her customary corner chair with the quiet dignity that had drawn me to her weeks ago, novel left at home. When Scott entered, striding in with coffee, the room's energy shifted perceptibly to tension. He wore his usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt stretched tight, his clipboard clutched like a shield against whatever corporate audit was about to disrupt his carefully constructed kingdom of fear. His eyes swept the room with practiced authority until they landed on me standing at the front. For a split second, confusion flickered across his features. He'd seen me before, mopping, humiliated, but couldn't quite place the context in this suit. Then Sandra stood beside me and his attention shifted to the immediate threat of a corporate HR review, folder thick. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice carrying through the room with calm authority. No tremor. "We're here today to review ethical conduct standards at Serenity Haven. This facility has a proud history of hospitality excellence, founded on care, and we want to ensure that extends to how we treat each other as colleagues and team members, not just guests." Whispers rippled through the assembled staff like wind through tall grass, excitement and fear mixed. I saw Marcus, the kitchen manager with his chef's coat, shift uncomfortably in his seat, crossing arms. The housekeeping supervisor's face had gone pale, hands twisting, and Gloria, dear Gloria, dropped her pen with a soft clatter that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, rolling under a chair. Her eyes met mine across the room, wide, and I watched understanding bloom across her weathered features. Like a flower, the quiet woman who'd shared apples in silence, who'd offered kindness without expectation of return, was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time as the owner. Her hand pressed against her heart as if to steady its sudden racing, tears glistening. Scott's chuckle cut through the tension like a blade, forced. "Well, well," he said, rising from his chair with theatrical confidence, arms wide. "Now you're playing inspector. What's next? Going to teach us all how to fold towels properly? Or scrub floors yourself?" The condescension in his voice was palpable, designed to diminish me in front of the very people who'd watched him humiliate others countless times, to reassert control. I reached into my briefcase, leather, and withdrew a manila folder thick with documentation, tabs color-coded. "These are formal staff complaints and guest incident reports linked directly to your management practices. Mr. Morrison," I said, extending the folder toward him with steady arm. 23 documented cases of workplace harassment, hostile behavior toward employees, and conduct violations spanning the past 18 months. Verbal abuse, threats, favoritism. His confident smirk faltered as he opened the folder roughly. I watched his face drain of color as he recognized incident report after incident report, complaints he dismissed as whining, grievances he'd buried in drawers, testimonies from staff members who'd finally found the courage to speak their truth in anonymous forms or to me. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, pages flipping, but his voice lacked its usual conviction, cracking. "These people complain about everything. You can't run a business by coddling every sensitive." "Mr. Morrison," Sandra interrupted, her tone carrying the weight of decades in human resources, firm. "Based on these documented violations and witness statements, corporate has approved your immediate suspension pending a full investigation. You'll need to surrender your access cards and any company property now. Security will escort you." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved, no one breathed. Scott's face cycled through disbelief with wide eyes, anger flushing red, and finally a kind of desperate panic as he realized no allies. As the reality crystallized, he looked around the room, perhaps expecting someone to defend him, to speak up on his behalf after months of fear. Instead, he found only the faces of people he'd spent months terrorizing, watching him face consequences for the first time, expressions a mix of relief and justice. He stormed toward the door, his clipboard clattering to the floor with papers scattering as he shoved past Jordan's chair roughly. "This isn't over," he muttered through gritted teeth, though whether to me or the room in general remained unclear, voice echoing down the hall. The door slammed behind him with a finality that seemed to release something in the air, tension that had been building for months like a storm, fear that had kept good people silent for far too long in break rooms. No one clapped, no one cheered. The moment was too heavy, too significant for celebration, a turning point. Instead, there was a collective exhale, shoulders dropping, as if everyone had been holding their breath, for longer than they'd realized, years perhaps. Later that afternoon, after debriefs and tears, I found myself in the retreat's main conference room with high ceilings, facing the VTech executives who were scheduled to remain for 2 more days of sessions. Nina Foster sat in the front row, her expression unreadable but her presence deeply reassuring. A rock. The others arranged themselves in clusters around the table, their expensive casual wear rumpled from travel and confident postures marking them as people unaccustomed to being lectured about their behavior by staff. 3 nights ago, I began, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to share, standing tall. I stood in this very building wearing a housekeeping uniform, carrying a mop that had been thrown at my feet for your entertainment by your host. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the group as memories clicked into place, faces paling. You laughed. You took photos. You treated a human being's dignity as disposable for the sake of a moment's amusement, a joke. One woman in the back row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Her face flushed with what I hoped was shame, makeup running. Others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their phones fascinating or the table surface infinitely interesting with its wood grain. But Nena sat with her arms crossed and her face radiating pride, the look of someone who'd chosen correctly when it mattered most, nodding slightly. I want to tell you about the real cost of that laughter, I continued, and for the next 20 minutes, I shared not just my story in detail, the heat, the throw, the splash, but the stories of every person who'd ever been dismissed, degraded, or dehumanized in the name of someone else's entertainment or efficiency. The room grew quieter with each word, the weight of collective responsibility settling over them like a heavy blanket, air thick. When I finished, voice unwavering, the silence stretched long enough to feel permanent, pins dropping audible. Finally, the Vitesh CEO, a man who'd laughed loudest that night, belly shaking, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice noticeably subdued, hands folded. "We owe you and your entire staff a formal apology. This isn't who we want to be as a company. We'll do better." It was a start, not redemption perhaps, but recognition of wrong. And sometimes recognition is where real change begins, the seed. The VTech executives departed on Wednesday morning, their luggage heavier with the weight of uncomfortable truths and promised policy reviews. As their black SUVs disappeared down the winding driveway, dust-kicking, I found myself standing alone in the employee break room. The mop, the same one, rested against the wall where someone had carefully cleaned and positioned it, handle polished. Jordan appeared in the doorway, a measuring tape in one hand and a curious expression on his face, brow raised. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the clear display case he'd helped me order from a local craftsman online. The glass was pristine, the wooden base crafted from reclaimed oak that matched the retreat's rustic aesthetic perfectly. "Absolutely certain," I replied, lifting the mop with reverence rather than resignation, no tremor. Inside the case, it looked transformed, not a tool of humiliation but a symbol of dignity reclaimed, elevated. The brass plaque Jordan had engraved read simply, "Respect starts here." As word spread through the building via texts and whispers, staff members began filtering into the break room throughout the afternoon. They came quietly, individually, some touching the glass with gentle fingers as if it were sacred, others simply standing in contemplative silence, heads bowed. Emma, the young cleaner who'd become my first ally in kindness with the granola bar, traced the letters on the plaque with tears in her eyes, streaming. "It's beautiful," she whispered, voice thick. "It's us." The real work began that evening in my temporary office, formerly Scott's domain with its corner window, now stripped of his aggressive motivational posters shouting excellence or else, and redecorated with plants in pots and comfortable seating, cushions soft. I spread the existing training manuals across my desk, thick binders. Their corporate speak language and intimidating legal jargon painted a picture of an organization more concerned with protecting itself from lawsuits than supporting its people with growth. Page by page, I rewrote everything late into the night, coffee cooling. Where the old manual stated, employees must maintain professional appearance standards at all times or face discipline, the new version read, "We believe everyone deserves to feel confident and comfortable while representing our team. Uniforms provided, alterations available. Instead of failure to comply will result in disciplinary action up to termination," I wrote, "If you need support meeting any of these guidelines, size, fit, comfort, please speak with your supervisor or HR representative confidentially." The anonymous reporting system required delicate engineering to build trust. Working with an outside consultant recommended by Nena Foster, experienced in tech, we installed digital kiosks in private locations throughout the facility, tucked into alcoves near the employee entrance with privacy screens, positioned discreetly in the locker rooms behind doors, accessible but not obvious to management walk-bys. Staff could report concerns, suggestions, or even compliments without fear of retaliation, responses routed to corporate. Dr. Sarah Chin arrived the following Monday, pulling up in a sensible sedan. Her warm smile and gentle demeanor immediately put nervous employees at ease as she introduced herself in orientation. A licensed counselor specializing in workplace trauma with years in corporate settings, she set up office in what had once been a storage room cluttered with boxes, transforming it into a sanctuary with soft lighting from lamps, comfortable furniture in blues, and the kind of confidentiality that allows healing to begin, door locked. "I've worked in hostile environments before," she told me, during our initial consultation over tea, factories, offices, "but the culture here feels different already, shifting. There's hope in the air, palpable. That's not something you can manufacture or fake." The quarterly shadowing program proved to be the most transformative initiative, bridging divides. When I announced that all management personnel would spend 1 full week every 3 months working alongside entry-level staff in their roles, the reactions varied dramatically in the meeting. Marcus, the kitchen manager, looked genuinely terrified, face paling. "You want me to wash dishes?" he asked incredulously, voice high. "Me? With my knives?" "I want you to understand the people who wash dishes," I corrected calmly. "Their challenges like steam burns, their insights on workflow, their contributions to our success without which we'd sink." His first day on dish duty was humbling, apron tied awkwardly. By hour 3, his pristine chef's coat was soaked with sweat and steam from sinks, arms red. By hour 6, he was chatting with the prep cooks about equipment improvements they'd been suggesting for months but ignored. Better racks, sharper tools. By week's end, he'd implemented 3 efficiency changes that cut cleaning time by 30% while improving working conditions with breaks. No more slippery floors. The transformation rippled through every department like waves. Housekeeping supervisors discovered that their staff had brilliant ideas about room turnaround procedures, like cart organization to reduce steps. Front desk managers learned about the physical toll of carrying heavy linens up 3 flights of stairs when elevators were busy, backs aching. When the service elevator broke down one day, maintenance supervisors realized their team had been jerry-rigging solutions with tape to problems that could be permanently fixed with modest equipment investments, budgets approved. Gloria's metamorphosis was the most remarkable to witness, heartwarming. No longer relegated to solitary lunches with her book, she found herself surrounded by colleagues eager to hear her stories of the old days and benefit from her decades of institutional knowledge about guests and systems. When I offered her the position of staff mentor, a newly created role focused on supporting new employees with training and facilitating communication between departments to reduce silos, her eyes filled with tears, hands shaking. "I never thought anyone saw me as more than just background. The cleaner," she admitted, voice trembling with emotion raw. "You've given me back my voice, my purpose." Jordan's promotion to facilities coordinator came with a 40% salary increase he gasped at and the authority to implement the safety and efficiency improvements he'd been quietly noting for years in a personal log. His first official act was installing ergonomic floor mats in the kitchen, thick and cushioned, dramatically reducing the back strain that had plagued staff for months with complaints. Emma's journey from crying in bathroom stalls over pressure to housekeeping team-led exemplified the kind of growth that became possible when people felt valued rather than expendable, threats gone. Her natural empathy and attention to detail, once overlooked by previous management, made her exactly the kind of leader who could inspire rather than intimidate, mentoring with patience. The halls began echoing with genuine laughter again. Not the nervous chuckles of people walking on eggshells fearing reprisal, but the easy camaraderie of colleagues who respected each other as equals. Conversations flowed more freely in break rooms. Suggestions were offered without fear of mockery. Problems were solved collaboratively in meetings rather than through intimidation and top-down orders. Scott's departure was handled with professional discretion. No spectacle, no press releases sensational, no dramatic confrontations in lots, just a final paycheck direct deposited and a mailed letter outlining the terms of his separation with NDA. I made a conscious decision never to speak his name again within these walls, erasing his shadow. He'd caused enough damage lasting years. He wouldn't be granted the power to continue haunting the people he'd tormented with memories. One evening in late August, as golden sunlight streamed through my office windows painting walls warm, I discovered a homemade apple pie on my desk, foil-covered. The crust was perfectly golden with lattice, the aroma rich with cinnamon and care fresh-baked. A small sticky note was attached to the pie tin, written in Gloria's careful handwriting looping, "Your mama would be proud. Not because you fought, but because you healed." I sat alone in that office, fork in hand, tears streaming down my face as I processed the profound truth in those words, sweet as the filling. My mother hadn't left me this inheritance to seek revenge or prove points in power plays. She'd wanted me to understand that real leadership meant creating environments where people could flourish without fear, where dignity was non-negotiable as air, where kindness was considered a strength rather than a weakness to exploit. The pie was delicious, flaky and warm, but the message was even sweeter, nourishing soul. Change wasn't just possible. It was happening. One conversation in hallways, one policy revision in manuals, one act of intentional kindness at a time, like notes or smiles. In transforming Serenity Haven, I was discovering that healing others had somehow healed something broken inside myself as well, scars from loss. As autumn approached, bringing with it the crisp promise of new beginnings, leaves turning, I found myself genuinely excited about the future we were building together, not just for me as owner, not just for the company profits, rising, but for every person who would walk through these doors and be treated with the respect and dignity that should be every worker's birthright, no exceptions. The mop in its glass case caught the evening light, no longer a symbol of humiliation thrown, but a daily reminder that respect truly does start here, with how we choose to see each other beyond roles, how we choose to treat each other with humanity, and how we choose to build something better from the ruins of what came before, stronger. The photograph appeared on Instagram at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, notification pinging, posted by Alex Chin, our newest marketing intern fresh from college, who'd started just 3 weeks earlier with enthusiasm. The image was simple yet powerful, the glass case containing the mop, morning sunlight streaming through the breakroom windows, casting prismatic rainbows across the brass plaque in colors. The caption read, "Our new boss used to mop this floor. This is what real leadership looks like. #respect starts here. #Serenity Haven." Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times by strangers. By afternoon, it had crossed platforms, Twitter with threads, LinkedIn with professional nods, Facebook with personal stories, each share carrying its own commentary about workplace culture change, dignity earned, and authentic leadership from ground up. News outlets picked up the story, but not in the sensationalized way I'd feared with tabloids. Instead, journalists focused on the transformation details, the healing programs, the radical idea that treating people with respect could actually improve business outcomes like retention and reviews. Good Morning America called on Wednesday for interview. The Today Show followed on Thursday with producers. I declined them all politely. This wasn't about creating a media spectacle or positioning myself as some kind of corporate savior on TV. The story belonged to Gloria with her pies, to Jordan with his mats, to Emma with her team, to every person who'd found their voice in a place that had once tried to silence them with fear. Instead, I found myself at my laptop late one evening, office quiet, the break room next door quiet, except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the night cleaning crew going about their work with newfound pride, humming tunes. The words flowed onto the screen like water finding its natural course down, no forcing. Learning leadership one floor at a time. The column wasn't meant to be a manifesto long, just an honest reflection on what I discovered during those 11 months of intentional invisibility undercover. I wrote about the arrogance of assuming leadership could be learned from textbooks in classrooms and boardrooms alone without dirt, about the profound wisdom that exists in every corner of an organization, from kitchens to maintenance, waiting for someone brave enough to listen without ego, about the difference between managing people as numbers and serving them as humans with lives. I submitted it to Harvard Business Review on a whim late night, expecting either rejection or heavy editing that would sanitize the raw emotion and personal anecdotes. Instead, they published it exactly as written within days. With a simple author bio, Stephanie Hartley is VP of Operations at Serenity Haven Retreats and believes that the best leaders are made, not born, one authentic interaction at a time. The response was immediate and overwhelming, inbox exploding. Messages from executives sharing their own stories of workplace transformation attempts, from employees describing toxic environments they hoped to change with printed article, from business students questioning everything they'd been taught about leadership hierarchy and power. One message from a hotel housekeeper in Denver brought tears to my eyes anew. "Thank you for seeing us invisible ones. Thank you for showing others that we matter too, our stories." But it was the email from Dr. Patricia Williams, Dean of Business at Northwestern University, that sparked the idea that would become my mother's true legacy enduring. "We'd like to invite you to speak to our MBA students," she wrote formally. "But more than that, we'd like to explore creating a scholarship program based on your mother's philosophy of servant leadership, hands-on." The Hartley Dignity Grant was born from that conversation over calls, designed not just to provide financial support tuition, but to fundamentally reshape how we think about leadership development from theory to practice. Instead of rewarding traditional metrics like GPA high or networking skills schmoozing, the grant required applicants to spend 6 months working in entry-level positions within service industries, hotels, restaurants, care. Their final essays had to demonstrate not just what they'd learned about business operations metrics, but how the experience had changed their understanding of human dignity in the workplace. Empathy built. The first recipient was chosen unanimously by our selection committee diverse. Emma Rodriguez, the young woman who'd once cried alone in bathroom stalls over mistakes, had submitted an application that read more like poetry than a traditional scholarship essay dry. She wrote about the power of small kindnesses like bars shared, about leadership as healing wounds rather than conquering competitors, about her dream of opening her own hospitality business where every employee would be treated as family with voices. The awards ceremony took place in the same break room where her journey had begun with the granola. Tables pushed. Gloria presenting the check oversized with smile, while Jordan operated the camera steady, and Marcus, transformed by his own quarterly shadowing, provided homemade cupcakes that had become his signature contribution to office celebrations. Frosted. "This isn't just money for school," Emma said, her voice steady now where it had once trembled with fear. "This is proof that pain can become purpose, that the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation for helping others rise." 3 months later, I found myself standing at my mother's graveside on a crisp October morning, wind gentle, the kind of day she'd always said was perfect for new beginnings, sky blue. The headstone was simple granite engraved with her name, dates, and a single line. She made spaces for healing. Fallen leaves carpeted the ground in shades of gold and crimson crunching, and somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour softly. I knelt and placed 2 items at the base of the stone carefully. A rolled cleaning rag, not the mop from the display case symbol, but a fresh cloth that symbolized ongoing work rather than past trauma finished, and a single white gardenia, her favorite flower pure. The gardenia had been surprisingly difficult to find in October off-season, requiring calls to 3 different florists, before I located one willing to special order it overnight. "I walked every step," I whispered, my breath visible in the cool air mist. "Just like you wanted me to. Just like you did when you were building something beautiful from something broken, piece by piece." The words felt simultaneously enormous in scope and intimate personal, a conversation across the veil of mortality that somehow felt as natural as our talks had been when she was alive, laughing. A groundskeeper worked quietly in the distance, raking leaves with the methodical care of someone who understood that tending to sacred spaces was itself a form of ministry respectful. He nodded respectfully as our eyes met brief, one caretaker acknowledging another in silent solidarity. Monday morning found me arriving at Serenity Haven before sunrise, not because I had to clock in, but because I wanted to witness the quiet. The building felt different in those quiet early hours, expectant with possibility, peaceful without chaos, humming with the potential energy of a place where good things were happening daily. I made coffee in the break room using the commercial machine that had intimidated me during my first week as a cleaner with buttons, but now felt like an old friend reliable. When Gloria arrived at her usual time, badge swiping, she found me sitting at our familiar table with 2 steaming mugs strong and a plate of the cinnamon cookies she'd mentioned liking during one of our silent lunches months ago. Bakery fresh. No cameras captured the moment private. No social media posts documented our conversation about her grandchildren, photos shown, her garden blooming, her plans for the quilting class she was teaching at the community center patterns. "You know what I love most about this?" she said, gesturing around the break room where other early arrivals were beginning to filter in, their greetings warm and genuine rather than perfunctory nods. It's not that you changed everything overnight with magic, it's that you proved change was possible at all, step by step. Through the windows clean, I could see Jordan consulting with a landscape architect about expanding the meditation garden beds, Emma training 2 new housekeeping staff with the patience and encouragement she'd once desperately needed, demonstrating folds, Marcus laughing with his prep cooks over some shared joke that would have been impossible during the regime of fear that had once governed this place, knives down. The mop in its glass case caught the morning light, no longer an artifact of humiliation, but a daily reminder that respect truly could start anywhere with anyone brave enough to model it first, leading. This was exactly where I belonged, not above the work in ivory, but within it, part of the ongoing effort to create something worthy of my mother's memory and everyone who would call this place their professional home, thriving. Some legacies are built on monuments tall and headlines bold. Others are built on quiet moments of dignity shared, one interaction at a time, until kindness becomes so embedded in the culture deep that cruelty can no longer take root or grow.